For more than 30 years, one man sat behind a desk that America trusted more than almost anyone else on television. Night after night, millions ended their evenings with the same familiar face, the same opening monologue, and the same promise that whatever happened during the day, they could finish it with a laugh. The stage of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson became a place where careers were launched, legends were made, and unforgettable moments unfolded in front of a live audience. But hidden inside those thousands of broadcasts is another story. It is not about the jokes that made history. It is about the jokes that history no longer laughs at. Looking back today, some of the show's biggest moments reveal just how much American comedy and American society has changed. The question is not whether these moments happened. The question is why millions once celebrated them without hesitation. Comedy has always reflected the era that creates it. Every generation believes its humor is harmless until time proves otherwise. The Tonight Show was no exception. During the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, television writers and comedians often treated race, ethnicity, and cultural stereotypes as reliable shortcuts to laughter. Studio audiences rarely objected. Television executives rarely intervened. Instead, these performances became some of the most replayed moments in late-night history. Today, many of those same clips leave viewers surprised, uncomfortable, or simply silent. They serve as reminders that entertainment can preserve not only a nation's funniest moments but also its biggest blind spots. Among all the comedians who walked onto Carson's stage, few created more anticipation than Don Rickles. The moment his name was announced, audiences knew anything could happen. He was famous for walking into a room and insulting nearly everyone inside it before sitting down. Actors, politicians, athletes, fellow comedians, no one was safe. His fearless style earned him the nickname the Merchant of Venom, and for years that reputation made him one of Carson's favorite guests. Rickles built his career on the idea that every person, no matter who they were, could become the target of a joke. His supporters argued that because everyone was treated equally, nobody was singled out unfairly. But the reality was often more complicated. Many of his routines leaned heavily on exaggerated ethnic stereotypes, foreign accents, and cultural assumptions that audiences of the time accepted without much thought. Looking back decades later, some of those punchlines feel far less like harmless teasing and far more like reflections of attitudes that society has since worked to leave behind. What made those appearances especially influential was not simply Rickles himself. It was the platform. Carson's show reached millions of homes almost every night. When audiences erupted in laughter after a joke built around a racial stereotype, it quietly reinforced the idea that this kind of humor belonged in mainstream entertainment. The biggest stage in late-night television gave those moments legitimacy, making them part of American popular culture rather than isolated comedy club routines. Even Carson's reactions became part of the performance. He often leaned back in his chair, laughed, covered his face, or playfully acted shocked as Rickles pushed another boundary. The exchange created an atmosphere where viewers understood that almost nothing was off-limits. It was unpredictable television, and unpredictability kept people watching. But decades later, those same exchanges tell another story, one about how cultural standards evolve while old broadcasts remain frozen in time. Yet history also deserves nuance. Many people who knew Rickles personally described him as generous, warm, and deeply respectful away from the stage. His friendships crossed racial and cultural lines, and several entertainers from different backgrounds defended his intentions. That distinction matters. Intent and impact are not always the same thing. A comedian may not intend harm, while the material itself can still reinforce stereotypes that affect real people outside the television studio. That tension is what makes Rickles' Tonight Show appearances so fascinating today. They are not simply records of one comedian's career. They are snapshots of an entertainment industry that rewarded shock, celebrated stereotype-based humor, and rarely paused to ask how those jokes might be received by future generations. Watching those clips today is less about judging the past than understanding it. But if Rickles represented comedy's willingness to ignore boundaries, the next guest represented something equally powerful: speed. Joan Rivers did not wait for laughter to fade before delivering her next punchline. Her jokes arrived one after another with incredible precision, leaving audiences barely enough time to breathe. Carson recognized her talent almost immediately, inviting her back again and again until she became one of the defining faces of late-night television. Long before she became a television icon in her own right, Rivers transformed stand-up comedy with her fearless delivery. At a time when very few women dominated late-night stages, she forced audiences to pay attention through confidence, sharp observations, and relentless energy. She joked about Hollywood, marriage, celebrities, aging, and even herself. Nothing seemed beyond her reach. But like many comedians of her generation, Rivers also relied on jokes built around ethnicity and cultural stereotypes. They appeared naturally within her routines because audiences had grown accustomed to hearing that style of humor. She sometimes exaggerated accents, referenced cultural cliches, or built punchlines around simplified assumptions about different communities. In the studio, those jokes were often rewarded with loud applause. Looking back today, they reveal how normalized those comedic shortcuts had become. One reason Rivers' material remains important is because it illustrates a larger pattern rather than an isolated incident. Late-night television did not simply reflect public attitudes. It also helped shape them. Millions of viewers watched these performances in their living rooms, where repeated stereotypes slowly became familiar. Whether audiences realized it or not, comedy influenced how people imagined cultures they might never personally encounter. Carson rarely interrupted that process. His role was to keep the conversation moving, maintain the energy, and make sure viewers stayed entertained. If a guest landed a joke that generated huge laughter, the show naturally leaned into it. That formula helped build one of the most successful programs in television history, but it also meant that certain assumptions often went unchallenged. The complexity of Rivers' legacy lies in the contrast between her influence and some of her material. She broke barriers that countless female comedians later benefited from. She transformed the expectations placed on women in comedy and proved they could dominate the same stage as anyone else. At the same time, portions of her early performances reflect cultural attitudes that modern audiences often view very differently. Both realities exist together, making her story impossible to reduce to simple labels. If Rickles and Rivers showed how stereotypes could become mainstream comedy, the next performer demonstrated something different. His routines relied less on rapid-fire insults and more on unforgettable characters. Those characters made audiences laugh for decades. Today, they raise a very different question. Where is the line between imitation and caricature? That question would follow Buddy Hackett every time he stepped onto Johnny Carson's stage. Buddy Hackett never needed an elaborate setup to capture a room. The moment he walked onto Carson's stage, viewers knew they were about to hear a story that could wander in any direction. His delivery felt effortless, almost as though he was making everything up as he spoke. That relaxed style made audiences feel like they were listening to an old friend rather than watching a rehearsed performance. But beneath the laughter was a style of comedy rooted in exaggerated characters, many of whom were built around ethnic stereotypes that audiences of the era barely questioned. Hackett often transformed different nationalities into larger-than-life personalities through accents, facial expressions, and exaggerated mannerisms. During the height of his career, those impressions were treated as harmless entertainment. Carson laughed alongside the audience, occasionally pretending that Hackett had gone a little too far before encouraging him to continue. It became part of the rhythm of the show. Looking back now, those routines reveal how easily television blurred the line between playful imitation and caricature. What once seemed ordinary now offers a revealing glimpse into how casually stereotypes were woven into mainstream entertainment. His appearances remind us that comedy rarely exists in isolation. A joke that earns applause in one generation may leave another asking entirely different questions. The performances themselves have not changed. The audience has. If Buddy Hackett represented the comfortable traditions of old-school comedy, Bob Hope represented something even bigger. By the time he appeared on Carson's couch, Hope was already an American institution. His career stretched from vaudeville to radio, from Hollywood films to television specials. Few entertainers had spent more years making Americans laugh. Hope's style depended on quick one-liners and impressions of public figures from around the world. But many of those impressions relied on broad cultural stereotypes that simplified entire nations into easy punchlines. Foreign accents became comedic shortcuts. Cultural differences became material for rapid-fire jokes. The audience rarely questioned it because that style of humor had dominated American entertainment for decades. What makes Hope's appearances especially significant is the enormous trust audiences placed in him. He was not viewed as a controversial figure. He was viewed as familiar. That familiarity allowed certain jokes to pass almost unnoticed, reinforcing ideas that many viewers never stopped to examine. Carson, as always, played the gracious host, smiling, laughing, and keeping the conversation moving without challenging the material. Looking back, Hope's legacy demonstrates one of history's recurring lessons. Great talent and outdated material can exist in the same performance. Admiring someone's achievements does not require ignoring the parts that have aged poorly. In fact, understanding both creates a more honest picture of television history. But not every controversial moment on Carson's stage came from comedians telling jokes. Sometimes the discomfort came from something much quieter, the way certain guests were presented, and the questions that were never asked. That became especially clear when Oliver North appeared on The Tonight Show. Unlike the comedians before him, North arrived carrying political controversy instead of punchlines. Millions of Americans already knew his name because of the Iran-Contra affair, one of the biggest political scandals of the 1980s. His congressional testimony had dominated television screens, turning him into one of the country's most recognizable public figures. Yet on Carson's stage, the atmosphere changed. The heated political debates that surrounded North outside the studio largely disappeared. Instead, viewers saw an approachable guest exchanging friendly conversation with one of America's most beloved television hosts. The interview reflected the purpose of late-night television. Entertain first, confront second. For many viewers, there was nothing unusual about that approach. But historians and media critics have since pointed to moments like these as examples of television's power to reshape public perception. A relaxed interview can soften the public image of even the most controversial figures. By focusing on personality instead of difficult questions, entertainment programs sometimes influence audiences in ways that extend far beyond comedy. That observation is not unique to Johnny Carson's show. It remains relevant across modern television, podcasts, and digital media. The format itself encourages connection rather than confrontation. Carson mastered that formula better than almost anyone. Looking across these very different guests, Rickles, Rivers, Hackett, Hope, and North, a common thread begins to emerge. None of them appeared on the program because producers wanted controversy. They appeared because they were popular, fascinating, or entertaining. Yet decades later, their appearances reveal far more than the producers ever intended. They reveal changing values. What audiences celebrated in 1975 is not necessarily what audiences celebrate today. The television archive has not changed. Society has. That is one reason The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson remains such an important piece of American history. It preserves more than celebrity interviews and famous punchlines. It preserves the attitudes, assumptions, and cultural norms of the generations who watched it every night. Some viewers revisit those old episodes with nostalgia. Others watch them with discomfort. Most experience both feelings at the same time. And perhaps that is exactly how history should work. The goal is not to erase the past or pretend it never happened. It is to understand why people laughed, why certain jokes succeeded, and why many of them no longer do. Comedy has always evolved alongside society. Every generation redraws the line between clever, offensive, acceptable, and unacceptable. Future audiences will almost certainly judge today's entertainment through standards we cannot yet imagine. Johnny Carson himself remains one of the greatest television hosts in broadcasting history. His influence on late-night television can still be seen in nearly every host who followed him. He created a stage where comedians became stars, actors revealed unexpected sides of themselves, and millions of Americans shared the same conversation before going to bed. But his greatest show also became an accidental time capsule. Hidden inside thousands of hours of laughter are reminders of how much America has changed, what it once celebrated, what it overlooked, and what it eventually chose to reconsider. Those moments are sometimes uncomfortable. They are sometimes surprising. But they are also part of the story, because history is not only preserved in speeches, elections, or headlines. Sometimes, it is preserved in the jokes that once brought down the house, and the silence that follows when we watch them today. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into television history, be sure to like the video, subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood and classic entertainment, and check out the next documentary on your screen. Some of the most fascinating stories are not the ones everyone remembers. They are the ones history quietly left behind.